Folks, the Ninth Circuit Court upholding uh, that judge in Washington that struck down Trump's travel ban doesn't surprise me. Okay? We've been living under what's called a de facto system of government for about over 8 decades now. And most folks don't realize this. You see, folks, I have a unique knowledge, and I know I do, simply because I've taken the time to get it. I mean, I've spent years doing legal and historical research on my own, and I have a unique knowledge. I know the truth. And the truth is we've been led back into a condition of servitude. You're not free. I mean, a lot of folks might have a better standard of living than a lot of other folks in the world, but that doesn't mean you're free. Now, there are 2 forms of government that can exist when there's a constitution or a fundamental law that's supposed to govern a nation. One is called de jure. Now, de jure means the government follows the Constitution. The fundamental law is respected. Now, the other one's de facto. Now, that government's pretty insidious. In other words, they'll claim the Constitution exists when, in reality, they pretty much do whatever they want. When the Constitution gets in the way, they kick it to the curb. But when something happens that they don't like, all of a sudden they bring the Constitution back and say, oh, this is unconstitutional. See, they're a bunch of hypocrites. That's all that's happening here. I mean, this statute from way back in 1952 on immigration has been enforced by several presidents with no problems from the courts. Now all of a sudden, President Trump enforces it and it's struck down. Folks, what happened back in the spring of 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt got elected president, he called an emergency session of Congress that lasted 100 days. And a great mass of law that was written outside the halls of Congress by just a bunch of lawyers that were associated with him who were college professors. They were called a brain trust. They wrote this great mass of law and called Congress forward to rubber stamp all this law. So Congress rubber stamped a whole bunch of law. They didn't even know what it was. Yeah. See, this is when Congress surrendered their legislative powers to an executive bureaucracy and to these college professors. Hell, it was college professors that wrote the Obamacare law. Your elected members of Congress had nothing to do with writing it. They didn't even read the damn thing. And this government is constitutional? Yeah, right. Anyway, what caused me to do all this research? See, when I lived in Golden, which was near Denver, Colorado, in the Denver Public Library, you could go all the way back into the late 1800s studying old volumes of weekly press. And I was curious about the income tax. So I knew the 16th Amendment was adopted in 1913. So I figured, well, gosh, surely there must be some kind of news articles back then in 1913. And I started going through all the volumes of Saturday Evening Post from 1913, because that was the big weekly publication back then that was popular with people. And sure enough, May 17th, 1913, there it is. A 10-term congressman from Tennessee, a Democrat named Benton McMillan, wrote an article entitled The Income Tax, fully explained the thing. And when I read that article, I'm like, well, you sorry sons of bitches, you perverted this thing, haven't you? Yeah. See, the income tax was sold to the people back then as a tax upon the big money. All these big guys, these big corporations, and all these super wealthy people. See, all their gains and profits. That's what the income tax was designed to do. To tax the gains and profits of the big guys, the big wealthy guys, and the big wealthy corporations. Yeah, so that told me, I said, okay, it wasn't sold to the people as a tax upon their wages. When did this damn thing get perverted? There had to be some period in history where it got perverted. So I kept going through time, going through all these volumes of weekly press. I said, there's got to be a period in history where the damn thing got perverted. And I found it when Franklin Roosevelt got elected president in 1932, and it took office in the spring of 1933. It was that damn New Deal of the 1930s. It's held up to us as such a great thing, when in fact all it was the Democrats abandoning their platform. Franklin Roosevelt's entire campaign for president in 1932 was a lie. He didn't do anything he said he was going to do. He had a secret agenda that he imposed on the people after he took office, and he got away with it. A lot of people looked up to him back then as if he were some sort of a god. They did. My mama was one of them. Ronald Reagan voted for Roosevelt 4 times. When in fact what he did, he kicked de jure government to the curb and replaced it with a de facto government. See, the press and the media has criticized Trump for calling this judge in Washington a so-called judge. Look at what Roosevelt did to the judiciary back then. My God, he went after him like gangbusters. Yeah, the Supreme Court back then was dubbed as the 9 old men. And one time when the Supreme Court unanimously 9-0 ruled that the executive branch of government can't just write law and enforce it on the people and bypass the Congress, Roosevelt pitched a fit. Yeah. I mean, he said that a judge back in England at one time got hanged for declaring an act of Parliament void. Yeah, imagine if Trump did that. Said, yeah, there was one time when they hung judges for declaring, executive orders of kings void. Oh my God, the press would have a field day on that, wouldn't they? But Roosevelt did that crap, and he got away with it. At one time there were 50 or more bills in Congress written by his brain trust that were designed to junk the entire federal judiciary. But anyway, Roosevelt was able to pack all the lower courts, and as time went on, as justices died and retired on the Supreme Court, he packed it. So you see, to complement a de facto system of government, you've got to have a de facto judiciary, don't you? Yeah. See, the Social Security Act was the first law that started taxing wages at 1% in 1937. Did you know that? Yeah. And the Supreme Court in 1920 in Eisner versus Macomber said the income tax didn't grant any new taxing powers to the federal government, and they were right. All it did was remove the rule of apportionment to taxes laid upon the gains and profits of business activity. See, the federal government had the constitutional authority to tax the gains and profits of business activity, but the Supreme Court had ruled that it was a direct tax and therefore subject to the rule of apportionment. All the 16th Amendment did was remove the rule of apportionment so they could treat it as a direct tax, so the money went right into the Treasury and the Congress could spend it as they saw fit. That's all it did. It removed the rule of apportionment. It did not grant any new taxing power. And when they started taxing wages in 1937, it was openly reported in the press that was a brand new taxing power that had never been exercised before in the history of the country. And to this day, the Supreme Court has not ruled on the constitutionality of taxing wages. Did you know that? Oh yeah, this system is screwed up, people. And the courts are screwed up too. See, what Trump really needs to do, and I doubt this will happen, he needs to do just like Franklin Roosevelt did. Yeah, see, Franklin Roosevelt declared an emergency to destroy de jure government and impose de facto government. Well, that's what Trump should do. Do the same thing Franklin Roosevelt did. Yeah, declare an emergency to destroy de facto government and reinstate de jure government. And that would mean pretty much cleaning house of the whole federal judicial system and starting over. Yeah, just like they did in the beginning when the Constitution was framed. They had to pick all the judges from scratch and the justices of the Supreme Court. And that's really what needs to be done again. If you really want to fix this mess, there's a whole mess of judges that need to go. It needs to start over again. And judges need to be placed in all the courts that respect the truth. And that's really what it all boils down to. Do you respect the truth or don't you respect the truth? Folks, all you got to do is just go to my website. Just take the time. Watch that 4-part series on the perverted Constitution. It's the truth. Might not be pleasant, but it's the truth. Anyway, I just thought I'd rant. And I didn't have any teleprompter either. I just finished eating supper and cracked a cold beer and decided to rant. Anyway, y'all have a good evening.